On a late September night in 1983, deep inside a secret Soviet bunker, one man sat in front of a wall of glowing screens and realized that, according to the machines, the world had just started to end. The early warning system was screaming that the United States had launched nuclear missiles toward the Soviet Union. Red lights flashed. Alarms wailed. A computer showed the word launch where there should have been only calm green. By the rules, the officer on duty had a simple job. Trust the system, report an attack up the chain, and let the missiles on his own side prepare to answer. That officer's name was Stanislav Petrov, and for several long minutes, he had to decide whether the screens in front of him were telling the truth or quietly lying. The year 1983 was one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The Soviet leadership believed the United States might actually be preparing a surprise first strike. New American missiles were being deployed in Europe, military exercises looked more aggressive, and propaganda on both sides painted the enemy as reckless and capable of anything. Inside the Soviet Union, that fear turned into concrete orders. Watch the skies, trust the machines, and never be late in reporting a threat. If an attack was real, minutes of hesitation could mean the difference between launching a counterstrike and being destroyed without answering. Petrov worked at a secret facility near Moscow that housed part of the early warning system. His job was to monitor data from satellites tasked with detecting missile launches from the United States. The system watched the glow of rocket exhaust against the dark of space. When the computers saw the right pattern, they were programmed to sound the alarm. Incoming missiles. It was supposed to give the Soviet leadership a short window of time, perhaps 15 minutes, to decide whether to launch their own weapons before the enemy bombs arrived. Just after midnight on September 26, the lights in the command center suddenly changed. One of the satellites reported that a missile had been launched from the United States. The word START appeared on the main screen. Sirens began to howl. Technicians looked to Petrov, heartbeats pounding through the electronic noise. According to the procedures, he was supposed to quickly classify the alert as attack or false alarm and pass that judgment upward. Above him, other officers were ready to inform the highest command. At the very top was the power to unleash a nuclear response. For a few seconds, there was hope that this was just a glitch. But then the system showed a second missile. Then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. The sirens did not calm down, they grew more insistent. The computer screens insisted that several U.S. intercontinental missiles were on their way toward Soviet territory. In the logic of deterrence, this was the nightmare scenario. The beginning of an all-out war. Yet something about the pattern bothered Petrov. If the United States truly intended to strike first, would it really begin with only a handful of missiles? He knew the technical weaknesses of the system he was watching. The satellite network was relatively new. Engineers had warned that certain angles of sunlight, reflected from high clouds, might confuse the sensors. From a purely official standpoint, however, he was not supposed to rely on his doubts. The machines were designed to be trusted. The procedures assumed that data, once presented, was correct. Under that logic, 5 reported launches meant 5 real missiles, and those missiles meant that within minutes, nuclear fire would begin falling on cities and bases across the Soviet Union. Petrov made a different choice. Instead of immediately confirming an attack, he told his superiors that the alarm was probably false. It was not an easy statement to make. If he was wrong and the missiles were real, he would be responsible for losing precious minutes that could have been used to prepare a response. If he was right, he would be quietly preventing the start of a potential global catastrophe. In that moment, surrounded by blinking lights and the eyes of his colleagues, he relied on a mixture of technical knowledge, intuition, and a grim sort of logic. A real American first strike, he reasoned, would likely involve hundreds of missiles, not just a few. The minutes that followed were some of the longest of his life. The computers continued to show incoming warheads, but ground-based radar stations, which would normally confirm such a launch, saw nothing. The predicted impact times came and went. No explosions were reported. No cities vanished. Slowly, the noise in the command center began to quiet. One by one, the red lights went dark. The screens returned to their usual, almost boring patterns. The supposed attack melted away into the air it had come from. What remained were exhausted officers, stacks of printouts, and the heavy realization of how close the world had just come to disaster. Later investigations found that the satellites had indeed misread sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as the heat signature of missile launches. The system was not only imperfect, it was dangerously fragile, capable of turning harmless patterns in the sky into the beginning of Armageddon. In theory, safeguards up the chain of command might still have stopped a Soviet launch even if Petrov had passed on the alarm as real. In practice, under intense pressure and fear, those higher officers might have chosen to believe the machines. The true number of close calls in the nuclear age is larger than most people realize. In the immediate aftermath, Petrov did not become a hero. Inside the secret world he lived in, his actions were complicated and embarrassing. On paper, he had broken procedure by not treating the alarm as a confirmed attack. If the system was to maintain its image of reliability, it could not publicly admit that a single lieutenant colonel's intuition had saved it from triggering a catastrophic mistake. Official reactions were mixed. He was questioned, criticized for incomplete paperwork, and eventually moved to a different post. The incident itself remained classified for years. Only long after the Soviet Union collapsed did the story begin to leak out, first through interviews, then through documentaries and books. People around the world learned that, on a night they had slept through peacefully, an unknown officer had wrestled with a choice between obedience and judgment. Many began to call him the man who saved the world, not because he single-handedly controlled every decision, but because his refusal to blindly trust a faulty system interrupted a chain that might have been impossible to stop once it gathered full speed. The tale of that night is chilling for more than one reason. It shows how fragile the safety of millions can be when it rests on complex technologies and human nerves stretched to the limit. It reveals that nuclear war might not begin with deliberate malice, but with misunderstanding, a reflection on a cloud, a misinterpreted blip on a radar, a tired operator following orders too rigidly. It also shows that, in a world built on hierarchy and protocol, the quiet courage to say this doesn't look right can be as powerful as any weapon. Today the screens are more advanced, the satellites sharper, the software more sophisticated. But perfection is still a myth. Systems fail, sensors misread, people make mistakes. The false alarm of 1983 is part of a longer list of incidents when both the United States and the Soviet Union, and later Russia, came uncomfortably close to firing weapons no one could ever call back. Each time, survival depended not only on engineering but on individuals who hesitated, questioned, or simply refused to believe that the end of the world had truly arrived. When you think about Stanislav Petrov sitting in that bunker, surrounded by machines insisting that he was watching the beginning of a nuclear attack, it is easy to imagine what might have happened if a slightly different person had been on duty. Someone more fearful, more obedient, more eager to follow the rules exactly as written. In that alternate timeline, his report would have been different, the phones above him would have rung with more urgency, and the night sky might have filled with the light of missiles launched in response to ghosts. Instead, the world outside that underground room went on as usual. People slept in their homes, unaware of how close they had come to never waking up. Children dreamed of school and cartoons, not knowing that their future had just been weighed and, for once, chosen carefully over the demands of a machine. Petrov eventually retired, living a quiet life, his story mostly unknown. But the lesson of his decision remains. Sometimes, the most heroic act in history looks, from the outside, like doing nothing at all, just sitting in a chair, staring at a screen, and quietly refusing to let fear push the world over the edge.